Hiya! So last time we were reading The Hobbit and we had got up to page 14. My camera had stopped quite abruptly because I'd run out of storage, but that worked out quite well because we were up to about 20 minutes into chapter 1. So if you're reading along with me, then just turn to page 14 and we are about halfway down, and there has been lots of dwarves arriving at Mr. Baggins' house. So let's have a little see what happens next. Now we are all here, said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs. Quite a merry gathering. I hope there's something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. What's that? Tea? Oh, no thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me. And for me, said Forin. And raspberry jam and apple tart, said Bifur. And mince pies and cheese, said Bofer. And pork pie and salad, said Bomber. And more cakes and ale, and coffee if you don't mind, called the other dwarfs through the door. Put on a few eggs, there's a good fellow, Gandalf called after him, as a hobbit stomped off to the pantries. And just bring out the cold chickens and pickles. Seems to know as much about the inside of my larders as I do myself, thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his door. By the time he'd got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. Confusicate and be bother these dwarfs, he said aloud. Why don't they come and lend a hand? Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen and Philly and Killy behind them, and before he could say, "Knife," they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlour and set out everything afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party with the 13 dwarfs all round, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireside nibbling at biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying not to look as if this was all perfectly ordinary and not in the least a bit of an adventure. The dwarfs ate, and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. I suppose you'd all like to stay for supper, he said in his politest, unpressing tones. Of course, said Forin, and after, we shan't get through the business till late, and we must have some music first. Now, to clear up. Thereupon the 12 dwarfs, not Forin, he was too important, and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on the top, with one hand, while the hobbit ran after them, almost squeaking with fright. Please be careful, and please don't trouble, I can manage. But the dwarfs only started to sing. Chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks, that's what Bilbo Baggins hates, smash the bottles and burn the corks. Cut the cloth and tread on the flat, pour the milk on the pantry floor, leave the bones on the bedroom mat, splash the wine on every door, dump the crocks in a boiling bowl, pound them up with a thumping pole, and when you've finished, if any are whole, send them down the hall to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates, so carefully with the plates. And of course they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away, safe as quick as lightning, while the hobbit was turning round and round in the middle of the kitchen trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and found Forin with his feet on the fender smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and wherever he told one to go, it went up the chimney or behind the clock, on the mantelpiece or under the table, round and round the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through each of Forin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to hover over the wizard's head. He had a cloud of them about him already, and in the dim light it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood still and watched. He loved smoke rings, and then he blushed to think how proud he'd been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had sent up the wind over the hill. Now, for some music, said Forin. Bring out the instruments. Killy and Philly rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dorry, Norry and Orry brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bomber produced a drum from the hall. Bifur and Bofer went out too, and came back with clarinets that they'd left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, Excuse me, I left mine in the porch. Just bring mine in with you, said Forin. They came back with voles as big as themselves, and with Forin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Foreign struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else, and was swept away into dark lands under strange moons, far over the water and very far from the hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered, it was April, and still they played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on, and suddenly first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarfs in the deep places of their ancient homes, and this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. For over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day to seek the pearl-enchanted gold. The dwarfs of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells. For ancient king and elvish lord, there many a gleaming golden hoard, they shaped and wrought and light they caught, to hide in gems on hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung, the flowering stars on crowns they hung, the dragon fire in twisted wire they meshed the light of moon and sun. For over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to claim our long-forgotten gold. Goblets they carved there for themselves, and harps of gold where no man delves. There lay they long, and a many a song was sung unheard by men or elves. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, it flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. The bells were ringing in the dell, and men looked up with faces pale. The dragon's ire, more fierce than fire, laid low their towers and houses frail. The mountains smoked beneath the moon, the dwarfs, they heard the tramp of doom. They fled their hall to dying full, beneath his feet, beneath the moon. For over the misty mountains grim, to dungeons deep and caverns dim, we must away, ere break of day, to win our harps and gold from him. As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands and by cunning and by magic moving through him, a fierce and a jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something, tookish, woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls and explore the caves and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out in the dark sky above them, in dark caverns. Suddenly in the wood beyond the water, a flame leapt up, probably somebody lighting a wood fire, and he thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was plain Mr. Baggins of Bag End under hill again. He got up trembling. He was less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, and more than half a mind to pretend to and go and hide beneath the beer barrels in the cellar and not come out again until all the dwarfs had gone away. Suddenly he found that the music and the singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him, with eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Foreign, in a tone that seemed to show that he guessed both halves of the hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo apologetically. "We like the dark," said all the dwarfs. "Dark for dark business. There are many hours before dawn." "Of course," said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed a stool and sat in the fender, knocking over the poker and shovel with a crash. "Hush," said Gandalf. "Let Foreign speak." And this is how Foreign began. "Gandalf, dwarfs, and Mr. Baggins, we are met together in the house of our friend and fellow conspirator, this most excellent and audacious hobbit. May the hair on his toes never fall out. All praise his wine and ales." He paused for breath and for a polite remark from the hobbit, but the compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins, who was wagging his mouth in protest at being called audacious and, worst of all, fellow conspirator, though no noise came out. He was so flummoxed. So Foreign went on. "We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, means, policy, and devices. We shall soon, before the break of day, start on our long journey, a journey from which some of us, or perhaps all of us, except our friend and counsellor, the ingenious wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our object is, I take it, well known to us all. To the Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one or two of the younger dwarfs, I think I should be right in naming Killy and Philly, for example. The exact situation at the moment may require a little brief explanation. This was foreign style. He was an important dwarf. If he had been allowed, he would probably have gone on like this until he was out of breath, without telling anyone there anything that was not known already. But he was rudely interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't take it any longer. It may never return. He began to feel a shriek coming up inside, and very soon it burst out like the whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarves sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of his magic staff, and in its fireworks glared the poor little hobbit. He could be seen kneeling on the hearthrug, shaping like a jelly that was melting. Then he fell flat on the floor and kept on calling out, struck by lightning, over and over again. And that was all they could get out of him for a very long time. So they took him and laid him out of the way on the drawing-room sofa with a drink at his elbow, and they went back to the dark business. "Excitable little fellow," said Gandalf as they sat down again. "Gets funny queer fits, but he is one of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch." If you've ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you will realise that this was only poetical exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even to old Took's great-grand-uncle, Bulrora, who was so huge, for a hobbit, that he could ride a horse. He charged the ranks of the goblins of Mount Graham in the Battle of the Green Fields and knocked their king head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down the rabbit hole, and in this way the battle was won and the game of golf invented at the same time. In the meanwhile, however, Bulrora's gentler descendant was reviving in the drawing-room. After a while, in a drink, he crept nervously to the door of the parlour. This is what he heard, Gloin speaking. "Humph," or some snort more or less like that. "Will he do you think? It is all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but one shriek like that in a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all his relatives and kill the lot of us." I think it sounded more like fright than excitement. In fact, if it had not been for the sign on the door, I should have been sure he'd come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped eyes on the little fellow bobbing and puffing on the mat, I had my doubts. He looks more like a grocer than a burglar. Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took side had won. He suddenly felt he would go without bed and breakfast to be fought fierce. As for little fellow bobbing on the mat, it almost made him really fierce. Many a time afterwards the Baggins part regretted what he did now, and he said to himself, "Bilbo, you were a fool. You walked right in and put your foot in it." "Pardon me," he said. "If I have overheard words that you were saying, I don't pretend to understand what you're talking about, or your reference to burglars, but I think I'm right in believing," this is what he called being on his dignity, "that you think I'm no good. I'll show you. I have no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago, and I'm quite sure you have come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts, but treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of East and fight the wild werewolves in the last desert, I had a great-great-great-grand-uncle once, Bulrora Took, and—" Yes, but that was a long time ago," said Gloin. "I was talking about you, and I assure you there is a mark on this door, the usual one in the trade, or used to be. Burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement and reasonable reward. That's how it is usually read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar if you like. Some of them do, it's all the same to us. Gandalf told us that there was a man in this sort for the parts looking for a job at once, and that he'd arranged for a meeting here this Wednesday tea time." "Of course there's a mark," said Gandalf. "I put it there myself, for very good reasons. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins." Mr. Baggins. Just let anyone say I chose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have all the bad luck you like, or go back to digging coal. He scowled so angrily at Gloin that the dwarf huddled back in his chair, and when Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask a question, he turned and frowned at him and stuck out his bushy eyebrows till Bilbo shut his mouth tight with a snap. "That's right," said Gandalf. "Let's have no more argument. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. If I say he's a burglar he is, or will be when the time comes. There's a lot more in him than you guess, and a deal more than he has any idea of himself. You may possibly all live to thank me yet. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp, and let's have a little light on this. And we're going to stop there halfway through page 24 and come back to it tomorrow. See you then.